Hello friends, welcome back to another video. I'm really excited to make this one. It is a book related video and I love making book related videos. It feels like forever since I made a book related video. I think it was the end of the summer. And yes, I'm doing an English video this time. I'm really sorry to Stephanie and anybody else who experienced some confusion because I didn't introduce in my last video that I would only be speaking in Arabic, and I'm really sorry I put in an English title, but I didn't explain well enough that it would be an entirely Arabic video, so apologies. I'm back with an English video, and it is a book video, something that I love doing. I love making book videos, and today we're going to be talking about the best books that I read in the last year. Now, I want to preface this whole thing by saying that I am not someone who tracks my reading, and so I may have forgotten a few books that I read, and then I also am someone who is really bad at finishing books, even if I start them, and so I may have put certain books in my recent reads videos that I was recently reading that I never ended up finishing. Anyway, I talked a lot about this on my Instagram story, but yeah, I'm really guilty of this, of starting books and not finishing them. And so this is a list of the best books that I have finished in 2018, because I don't think it counts. I don't think you're allowed to say it was the best book that you read in 2018 if you didn't finish it. Before I talk about the books that I finished that I really enjoyed in the last year, I just want to make some honorable mentions for books that I did start that were amazing, that I really want to finish, but I just for some reason or another did not get to finish them, but were really amazing books. So the first of these is, and I'm really upset that I never ended up finishing this one over the summer, Other Minds by Peter Godfrey Smith, The Octopus and the Evolution of Intelligent Life. This was such an amazing read, and I got a bit over halfway through it, and then I, for some reason, never finished it, but it was really interesting. It was discussing consciousness and theory of consciousness by analyzing the consciousness of octopods and cephalopods, and it just was really, really, really interesting. But yeah, I do want to eventually finish this one, but just an honorable mention. It was an amazing read. I highly recommend it. Another amazing read that I was super absorbed and in it, and then for some reason never got around to finishing it. And I think it was because my semester started. To be fair, a lot of the times I don't finish books because I have university reading to do, and then I prioritize that. But this is The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli. It is incredible. I absolutely loved 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli, and he's just such a good writer. I think he's writing in Italian and these are translated, but the translation is excellent as well, and this one's all about time, and you know that I love to read and talk and think and write about time, and so I just highly recommend this one as well, and I just can't wait to eventually finish it. But yeah, I can't say that it was one of my favorite reads, but it really was, even though I only got a third of the way through it. And finally, I think I read most of this one, but again, I don't feel comfortable saying that it was one of my favorite reads because I never properly finished it, but this is Zen Poems, a collection of Every Man's Library Pocket Poets series that I really, really love. And this one, as well as the Arabic poems collection, I really, really enjoyed. And although I didn't finish them, I was really immersed in them, and they were such good reads. So yeah, those were the honorable mentions. I also started Sapiens, but I feel like because it's such a big book, and I didn't really have time to dedicate to such a big book, and because it was so historical, I never got around to finishing it, and I didn't even get far enough through it that I could say that it was one of my favorite reads, but maybe I will finish it this year. And I really want to read Homo Deus actually more than I want to read Sapiens, but I thought to read both of them would be best. But anyway, yeah, that was also an honorable mention that I never got around to finishing. But yeah, okay, so getting into the actual books that I have completed and really, really enjoyed, and my favorite books that I finished in the past year. First of all, this is a reread, and no one is going to be surprised when I say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Definitely one of my favorite books, my favorite book series, and so funny. And I got to reread it at the end of last year, and it just brought me so much joy, as usual. And if you haven't read it yet, highly recommend it. It's literally my favorite book series and of all time. So definitely would read again in 2019. Maybe will, but I'm currently trying to reread the series, and I'm like halfway through Restaurant at the End of the Universe. And then, yeah, hopefully we'll complete the rereading of the series this year. The next fiction book, and like the only other fiction book in this list, is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. This was the first time I was reading this book, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I read it on a plane ride. It really kind of inspired me to go after my dreams and kind of accept the outlandishness of some of my dreams, because I feel like a lot of us kind of give up on dreams, and the whole point is the protagonist isn't giving up on his dream, and he is going on this pilgrimage that he wants to take, and he is going to make it to the pyramids. And it's so cool. It's really cool that it starts in Spain, or the Andalus, and his like biggest desire, the main character, is to go to Egypt, because like I'm from Egypt, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Like some people really love and care about our culture and think it's cool, and I think it's pretty cool. And yeah, I love the whole like realizing of destiny and like self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. And yeah, it just inspired me a lot. And yeah, okay, and then the graphic novel is Persepolis. I loved this book when I read it, and yeah, like I said, it's a graphic novel. It's a really cool like monochrome style, and it's about an Iranian girl growing up in Iran, and it's very historical, but it's also very personal, and I just loved it, and I really want to read part 2 of this when she grows up, and I think it was made into a animated movie, and I really want to see that actually. It seems really cool, but I absolutely love this one. Definitely one of the best reads of the year. Okay, next up, again, no surprise, I made a whole video about this one. It is the Tao of Nature by Chuang Tzu. This is one of the first ancient pieces of Eastern philosophy that I ever completely read. And of course, this is not the entire Tao of Nature. These are extracts that are collected by Martin Palmer, I believe. And yeah, it was really good. The only kind of critical thing I have to say about this is I wish it had an introduction, because I wish I knew more about the history and the context going into it so that I could really gain more out of it. But also it kind of stands alone in itself, and it just made me so curious, and it made me think so much, and it was just one of the most interesting reads of the year. Super interesting, super crazy interesting. Now onto poetry. I thought I read more poetry this year, but apparently not much of it stood out to me, because I only have 2 collections here. The first being 1,000 Mornings by Mary Oliver. This is a really like chicken soup for the soul kind of book. I really enjoyed it. I think it is so healing. Some of the poetry in here is just really personal and positive, and I really enjoyed it. Some of my favorite poetry, I guess I read over a year ago, and so it didn't really make it into this list, but one of the other and probably best poetry collections I've ever read from someone that I know personally in real life, which is really cool, is Other Beating Wings by Sara Masiri. And this is a bilingual collection, and I spoke about it in my last video, in my last like sit down talking video, and it's it's bilingual, but it's not translated, so there are English poems and there are Arabic poems, and neither of them are translated into the other language. But it's a really unique collection. It's really well written. It's super personal as well, but just so beautiful. It's also, there's illustrations in here that are pretty cool. So there are these like textual poetry illustrations, but then there's also just like little cool illustrations. I'm so impressed by this collection, and I think it's so well made. And you can find Sara at Faluka or Kahirati on Instagram, so definitely go and check her out and buy this collection from her because it's amazing. And yeah, okay, that would be the best poetry I've read this year. And then the rest of this collection is nonfiction. Who knew? I read so much nonfiction this year, and I loved so much of it. So the first nonfiction book that made it to my favorites is Africa's Tarnished Name by Chinua Achebe. Chinua Achebe is a very famous African, I think Nigerian fiction author, but also writes some nonfiction about Africa. And this is the Penguin Modern 1 pound editions that came out last year. And so many of them really touched me, and I really love this one. It talks a lot about like some pretty important issues, so yeah. Next was Create Dangerously by Albert Camus. I love Camus. When I read Myth of Sisyphus a bit over a year ago, I really enjoyed it. I read it for class. Then this was the first thing outside of the Myth of Sisyphus that I'd ever read by him, also aside from The Stranger, which I'm not a massive fan of, but like Create Dangerously. It's all about creativity and creating in the modern age, and even though he's writing from the last century, I think a lot of what he has to say critically about creation in the modern age is still really relevant. If you are a creative, I highly recommend it. And yeah, so much of this is like underlined, and it just made me really think a lot about stuff. And finally, from the Penguin Modern that really affected me this year was Audre Lorde's The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House. This is probably the one that touched me most and was like the most memorable. There's the essay in here called Poetry is Not a Luxury that's like really, really good, and I'm going to be quoting it in my dissertation. And there's uses of the erotic and women responding to racism, and it just talks a lot about just race and gender and yeah, like poetry. What more do I have to say? Go read this book. All right, the next book that was one of my favorite reads of the year because it was one of the most useful reads of the year, I think, for me, and it is No More Plastic. This was the book that I bought to kind of inform me more about plastic waste and how I can reduce my plastic waste. And I don't know if you can tell, but there's so many dog-eared pages, and it's just so informative, and it's actually really accessible. So a lot of the time, like, the pages just have these like quotes and statistics on them, and yeah, it really illuminates like how big the problem that we are facing as a planet is. And especially in the oceans, most of the plastic that we use ends up in the oceans. It made me kind of completely reevaluate how I'm living my life. I'm wanting to remove as much plastic as I possibly can from my life, and it's actually so difficult in the UK, I found, but he has just so many, Martin Dory, the founder of the 2-minute solution, has so many actually really easy to apply tips and tricks, and kind of just brings it to you in a really accessible way and makes it seem really easy. I would say that it oversimplifies some of the solutions, but that's kind of the point, is to get people to realize like how easy the solutions are. Like, one of the biggest things is like straws. Like, straws are so useless as a tool. Like, I don't think we need straws, or like most people don't need straws. And then if you do need straws, like, why do they have to be plastic? Why do they have to be this like non-degradable material that ends up in the oceans and like ends up in little turtles' noses? Like, I love turtles so much, and I don't want to be harming the sea creatures that we have. And like, there's so many videos that are circulating around like Facebook and Twitter and these places of like horrendous amounts of plastic that end up in the oceans. And like, I just read this book and read any other book you can about plastic waste, and yeah, just try to reduce your waste. Like, it's made me buy a bottle and a keep cup, and I almost never use like disposable plastic bottles or cups anymore. And yeah, this is such a big problem. It's like one of the biggest things that I've tried to change about my lifestyle this year, and this is the book that really kind of made me do it. So No More Plastic, really, really important read in my opinion. Definitely go read it. And yeah, plastic waste. Anyway, okay. Yes, okay. Another one of the most useful books that I read in this past year, and the ones that like I just consumed around the same time I was reading No More Plastic, is Goodbye Things on Minimalist Living by Fumio Sasaki. This one was really well written. I really enjoyed it. I also dog-eared a lot of the pages in here, and it starts in a really cool fashion, and it shows you all these different ways of living minimally, and obviously there are the extremes of minimalism that you see kind of like on this cover, but then there's also like ways that you can downsize the things in your life that will apply to you. And so it kind of introduces all these different ideas and different things that will help you change your mindset about objects, and I found it really effective for me, and maybe this won't be the book about minimalism that will touch you, but I mean, it was one of the best books that I read this year, so take that as you will. Yeah, one of the most fun books that I like engaged with, I don't want to say read because it's not necessarily like a read that you just like sit down and read it. It's a puzzle book actually, and it's called Lateral Logic, Puzzle Your Way to Smart Thinking by Dr. Gareth Moore. This was so fun. Like, I don't know how to describe this book other than it was just so fun. So I don't know if you've ever solved a logic puzzle, but in my first year of university we did a logic course, and it was very like formal logic, but I always felt kind of like incompetent when it came to logic puzzles. Like, I felt like I couldn't really apply the logic that I learned, and so I bought this book and started solving it with one of my best friends, and it was so fun. It was just so fun. And there are so many different types of puzzles in here as well. Like, you would think that logic puzzles like come in a specific format, but there's so many different types of puzzles in here, and it's really like well made. So it starts you on beginner puzzles, and it slowly gets harder as you progress, until that you're like an expert puzzle solver, and then you get like really difficult puzzles, and then there are also just like some really just creative activities in here that you can do, and like blackout poetry, and like make a shape out of these other shapes, and just like fun visual stuff as well, not only like mathematical or word puzzles if you're not super into that, but like it was really fun, and it taught me a lot about lateral thinking, and not just thinking about how to solve something in one way, but think about it in a lot of different ways. Definitely one of the best books I've read this year. Absolutely great. Finally, last two books. So this past year, I have taken a course called The Good Life in Ancient Philosophy. And in this course, we are studying Stoic philosophy, specifically the Roman Stoics. And of the Roman Stoics, Seneca. And there's this book, Dialogues and Essays, and technically I haven't finished this book, but because it's an essay collection, like I did read a few of the essays in here, and I really, really enjoyed them, and so I'm putting this in the, I mean, this is my video, I get to put it whatever I want into it, but yeah, like, this guy, man, his mindset is so great and inspiring, and he's such a good writer, and yeah, I really enjoyed reading Seneca last year, and his philosophy really impacted me, and like Stoic philosophy in general really impacted me in the past few months that I've been taking this course. And yeah, especially the essays on the happy life and on the tranquility of mind, I really enjoyed, and I thought there were a lot of lessons to learn in there, and I thought he's just such an eloquent writer, so I would highly recommend this collection, or just reading Seneca in general. Yeah, Stoic philosophy has been a really profound part of my past year. And finally is Sheila Hetty's Motherhood. You've heard so much about this, I'm sure, on BookTube. I definitely heard about it on BookTube. I would not have heard about it otherwise, but it was so interesting. Like, I didn't expect it to be so interestingly written. Like, I expected it to be like a memoir or just like a nonfiction piece of writing that discussed motherhood, but it was like this fictionalized account of her life that was presented in a very interesting way. And I'm not even sure if I've talked about this on this channel before, but this was like maybe the best book I read all year. maybe, I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was the best book I read all year because it is the best book out there, but this was like, it really just, it blew my mind, and I found it really interesting. I thought she had a lot of really good points to make. It made me really question a lot of the social norms around motherhood that you don't really see unless you are a woman who is struggling with this issue at that point in your life. But yeah, this was like just super interesting. I highly recommend it. And that's it. Those were the best books that I read in this past year. I'm just gonna segue into my kind of currently reading recent reads kind of thing, because I don't know when the next time I'll get to make a book video will be. So I'm just gonna like do this now. This book I've been wanting to read for like years, like seriously been wanting to read it for years, and I'm so glad that I finally got my hands on it and I'm finally reading it. Headscarves and Hymens: Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution by Bonat Tahawi. Bonat Tahawi is an Egyptian feminist. She's currently writing, she's a journalist and activist, and she's currently writing for like the BBC and Al Jazeera and CNN and PBS and NPR, and like there's so many platforms that she writes and appears on. And yeah, she's just really active as a feminist on a lot of issues relating to the Middle East and women in the Middle East and their relationship between women and their sexuality and the Middle East and policy and just social norms. And it's just such an important topic, I think, and it's not talked about enough, and there are not enough books on it, and she's amazing. And I read the first chapter and a half so far of this, and it's been really, really, really illuminating. There's so many things I didn't know about the whole thing. Like I obviously know some things from experience, but at the same time there's so many statistics from other countries in the Middle East that I am not aware of, and it's really depressing and like difficult to read, but it's so important, and I just want to get more informed on the topic. So yeah, great currently reading. The other thing I'm currently reading is a collection, another Every Man's Library Pocket Poets collection of Emily Dickinson's poetry. I've decided to use her for my dissertation as well because I freaking love her poetry. I think she's so interesting and she's such a good poet. It's amazing. But yeah, I'm about a third of the way through this one, and it's really, really good. And then I recently read and finished, and I want to make a whole video about this, so I won't get too deep into it, but The Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is another Stoic philosopher. I think he was the most recent one of all of them, perhaps, maybe, yeah, I think so. But yeah, he was writing in the 1st century. He's a Roman emperor, and he is talking about Stoicism and his own philosophy of mind and his own mindset and how that allows him to live a good life. And yeah, this is just like basically a self-reflective journal of his. I've read it twice now. In just 2019, I've read this book twice. That's how good it is. It's so good. I'm gonna make a whole video about it and about lessons we can learn about how to live a good life from the Meditations. So yeah, stay tuned and keep an eye out for that video. But yeah, this was the first book that I read this year, and it was amazing. And the second book that I read this year that I finished is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. This was also really illuminating on the same kind of level as one of the Tahawi's book, but it's specifically talking about the experience of being Black in the UK, something I do not know enough about at all, and so this was really illuminating. The first chapter is all about the history of slavery in the UK and the abolition of slavery, but the social repercussions and like effects of slavery that still persist in the UK. And then the next few chapters are all about how like the system is rigged against non-white British people, I guess. And yeah, I thought this touched on really important topics. I thought it was a really interesting account, and yeah, maybe I'll talk about it more, but this was an excellent read. things that I am really excited to read. I'm going to be reading these in the next couple days, so I'll just like tell you guys about them really quickly. I'm going to be reading What Art Is by Arthur Danto. I'm taking an aesthetics course this year. I'm really enjoying it, and Arthur Danto is a really famous critic and like just philosopher about these topics, and I'm really excited to see what he has to say about art. I am going to be kind of dipping in and out of this one because it's really important as a reference point, and I did study Wittgenstein. Well, spoilers. I already studied this philosopher last year briefly, but like way too briefly, so I'm trying to like deepen my understanding of him. But that is Ludwig Wittgenstein, a very famous philosopher of language, and yeah, these are just the major works. It has selected sections from the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which is his first book, and then the blue and brown books, which are studies for his philosophical investigations, and I read a bit of the philosophical investigations, and I made a video about the philosophical investigations if you're interested, and also the essay on certainty. So I'm really excited to read those and to be like dipping in and out of this one and really diving deeper into Wittgensteinian philosophy very soon. So yes, okay, that is it. That is all of the book news that I have for you guys of my recent reads of my last year, of my favorites. By the way, if you like hearing about my currently reading as I'm currently reading them and maybe some responses to some of these books, you should follow me on Instagram at intellectgrime because yeah, I post on my story all about books all the time, and yeah, that's mainly where I talk about books as I'm reading them and as I have responses to them. So I just finished editing this video, and thankfully I did not move the tripod because I forgot a couple of things. First of all, another great book that I read the past year was Some by David Eagleman. It was all about different versions of the afterlife, and I remember I really enjoyed that when I read it, and I made a whole video about the fact that I finally finished a book at that point in the year. So there's that one, and also I just wanted to let you guys know that because of this whole like chronic DNFing that I do with books, of like starting them and not being able to finish them or getting distracted, I have set myself a challenge to read 42 books this year, and I'm sure you can guess why that is the number that I've chosen. It's the meaning of life, universe, and everything, and I am obsessed with Douglas Adams and everything Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy related, so I'm gonna really try to do that this year, and I'm gonna try to finish 42 books, not just dabble and read some and read like a little bit of it. 42 books. No, I'm gonna try to finish 42 books. However, that being said, I'm already behind, so I'm not very optimistic about this goal, but I am excited about the possibility that it might come to fruition. It was the first time ever setting myself a reading challenge, and this YouTube channel and talking about books and making like book posts on Instagram and that kind of thing, this is the closest I've ever gotten to tracking my reading, and so we'll see how it goes. That's it. Let me know what books you enjoyed reading the most in the past year. I'll see you guys very soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, have a wonderful week. Bye.